Now, I left these nuts in there. I'm going to take these nuts out. And then you see this thing kind of fits into a socket, this bearing. Sometimes that can be a challenge because, as you recall, these things are punched out just a little bit, and to get them up in there, it's a real tight fit. And sometimes that can be a little bit of a challenge. So what I do is I put this there first and get those three bolts, started, and then I wrestle with this, and sometimes I have to put a C-clamp to mash these together in order to get it to go up there. So we'll see how this one goes for us. First I got to get these bolts. So I just want to put a drop of Loctite on these as well. Doesn't take much. Now, I should have put this little plate on there, but it's okay. I see that I have a couple of pieces that I didn't yet reassemble, including this little backing plate for the spring. So if you recall, it's 13mm bolts, and I'm putting a little drop of Loctite on them. And then as well, I'm going to put this arm on the steering knuckle where the tie rods go on. This arm to put on there, we can tighten it up later in a minute. We've also got to put a little Loctite on these bolts. Oops. Now, this thing is going to be a little tricky because it has to go in there, and you can see that because the bushings are not clamped all the way down, just because they have a tendency to slip out, I'm going to have to put a C-clamp on there. Once I get it started, it'll be okay, but until I do, looks like it's awful close. Now, we put bolt in from the back. No, it's not quite there. There we go. Now I have to align the cam so that I can get the bolt to go all the way through. And as you recall, the front cam is where I put my mark. So I'll get it started, and then I'll twist it around from the back to where the cam is in the proper position. And tighten it. So I need to tighten it a little bit. It's so tight that I can't move it. Now you see my cam is moving around to where my looks just right there. Perfect. Okay. Now, we got some choices. We need to tighten these up a little bit. But essentially the next thing we want to do is get a jack under here and reassemble this ball joint. Before we do that, we at least get these a little bit tight. I'll put a little more on those once I get this assembled. So now it's just a matter of putting a jack under there and putting some pressure on that, bringing it up to the top of this joint. Let me get that nut off of there first. I don't know whether you ever took the spring all the way out from underneath the car or not, but if you did, just notice it has to be near the same position. This backing plate has a little notch in it and the spring edge is right there, and so you see where they align. We have to be careful to make sure that they line up as we put this back. Now you see I'm just putting some pressure, and it's not the spring pressure, it's just, you know, I've got that tight. Maybe I should have kept it loose, but nonetheless, it won't be difficult. It shouldn't be difficult to get this lined up in a position to where it goes up in that joint enough to get that nut on it. And once I get the nut on it, then I can allow that spring to uncompress. But let's just get the nut tightened up a little bit. And as you recall, again, the wedge of the taper has to be engaged in order to lock the ball in place. So if we see that it's turning, we're going to have to put some pressure on it that way. But mine locked in already. So I'll tighten that up in a minute. Now the jack is out from underneath it, so it's all reassembled essentially. All I really need to do is get that spring lined up, let the pressure off the spring, of course, and let the spring down, and then put the shock on and tighten up all the things that I still have to tighten. But I'll tighten them once I get it all reassembled and get the load off that spring. Use this bar to line the spring up a little bit. Take the load off of it now. Get it right like that. And get my ratchet and long extension and let the spring load off. Yeah, I think I've got the load up, the tool completely loose. Maybe I'll put more turns. Now the tool, those. We'll grab a hold of that. You can see that tool is barely go in there. It's just machined exactly for that hole. It's a very tight fit. But of course, once I get that out of there, and I got my tool out. Now, as I recall, I did tighten that one. Now, what I do with the new tie rod end is the same thing I did with that other bar. I just make sure I've got the exact same length. So let's go make sure the length is right on the tie rod ends. Okay, well here's the new one and here's the old one, and I want to make sure that they're exactly the same length, and right now they're not, and they come loosely assembled. And so what you want to do is make sure that the two ends have about the same amount of adjustment on them. So, and actually that's the end I'm looking at there. So I have quite a bit of adjustment to do out like that. And I'm getting close here. Maybe. Oops, wrong way. It's about right there. Okay, now what I also want to do is, you see they came apart like that, so I want, essentially they're at 180 degrees apart. In other words, that shaft is that way and that's that way. Now the nut goes on the inside of the car, and this adjustment goes to the outside of the car. So if I were to look at it, this is on the driver's side, that it came apart like that. Okay, so I want it to essentially be the same way, about 180 degrees like that, and they weren't quite 180, so let's make it about like that. Okay, and then what we'll do is we'll tighten this up in that position. So we can tighten them tight when we get it on the car, but approximately like that. So that's what we want right there. So let's put it in the car. Now, on the inside one, we want to put the bolt in from the top to the bottom, so the nut's on the bottom. On the outside of the tie rod, it's the opposite way. Okay, and then the lock piece of this particular nut, you can see that it's got a little indentation in it, and that's the piece that locks this one. So, and I might even put a little Loctite on these just to be sure. Just to be sure. Again, the wedge has to engage in order to lock the ball down, and then you can see it is getting tight. Drop a Loctite on that as well. I'm going to get the whole thing assembled before I do the drag link, because I'm going to jack it up from either side equally and get under there and do the drag link. So it's going to be the very last thing that I do. Okay, now I want to tighten these nuts. They're 13 millimeters. They'll redo this when they align the car, but I've got it approximately aligned right now. This is called a toe-in, this particular adjustment. And that's what they need to fix whenever they finally adjust it. Now I'm going to have to get a... Okay. Now I recall I didn't have that real tight. I want to tighten that nut up right there. It's 19. Looks like. Okay, I think I got everything tight under here. We're going to reassemble this back plate, and then we'll leave it to you to reassemble the brakes. If you don't recall, we've got a video on this. And now, of course, after we do the drag link, you've got to go have it front end aligned. They have 3 adjustments to make. This one right here is called the caster. It adjusts the wheel that way. This adjustment right here on this tie rod end is called the toe in. That has to be adjusted. And this thrust on this back bearing back here, this back ball, it has to be screwed in and out, and that's called the camber. And so they're all interrelated. And so, the old way was just a tape measure and a level, and essentially that's all they're going to put on this. But you do have to take it and have it professionally aligned, and it does take some special equipment and a professional who knows exactly what the settings are. But because I took all those measurements, of links and measured that cam right there on that bolt, I've got it approximately where it was when I took it apart, so I know it's not very far off. Put the shock back on. Of course, you can see how easy that is to do. We've shown this in other ways, but essentially just put those 2 bolts in and just get the bolt in on top. Sometimes you have to jack it up and put a little pressure on the spring in order for the top nuts to go on, but that's about all there is to that. So the drag link is real simple. It's got a steering shock, what they call a steering shock right here. We need to take that off. It's a 17 millimeter. It's usually bolt out and take the steering shock off. Doesn't have any fluid left in it. Okay, and then there's just no adjustment, but there's a bolt on top of it's just 2 ball joints on this drag link. There's a bolt that goes through on each side that holds it on there, and we're just going to take that wedge and unbolt it. Or unbolt it first, I'm sorry, and then drive that wedge through there and knock them out and replace the other one, replace it with a new one, but there's no adjustment, as I said, on the drag link. It's the same drill with the tie rod end separator. We just need to... There's one.
Well, you just tighten it down and you're done.
Except sometimes these, you know, got the same problem. You gotta get it to wedge the taper or it won't, it just spins the ball inside the socket. But it did catch. And then we just have to put the damper on there, but I've got a new damper and that one's shot, so I'm going to replace it. It just tightens up the steering and makes it track down the road easier. We're just going to, see, this thing is shot and all the oil's gone out of that damper. It's supposed to be just like a shock absorber. It's shot. We might point out a couple of other items while we're under here. All modern steering systems are practically the same. They start over here. The steering box, I don't know if Gordon can see it where my finger is, but the bottom of the steering box is right here. That's where the power is. And this piece right here is traditionally called a pitman arm, after, I suppose it's a proper name out of the guy that invented it. I'm sure it is. Anyway, the arm that comes off of the steering box is called a pitman arm. And a drag link is hooked to one side of it, and then a tie rod into the tire. And the drag link goes over to the other side and hooks to a tie rod in, pushes that wheel. Now, the arm right here that's connected, that's between the drag link and the tie rod in, is called the idler arm, and it's just hooked to the frame, and you can see that there's a bushing assembly right here. And it has to be tight, and it is, but you can replace this entire bushing assembly right here, but there's nothing wrong with this one. It's not sloppy. But this is called the idler arm, and there's a rebuild kit for this idler arm as well, this assembly that's bolted to the frame. But of course, it's the thing that anchors it on this side. But it's okay, so I'm not going to mess with it. But this is bad, and so I'm going to replace the steering shock. You can see it's just a bolt. I won't put this on tape. We just have to undo that bolt, and then it just bolts to the frame and then to the drag link, and it absorbs some of the shock from the road and doesn't get all transmitted up to the steering wheel, and so it makes it steer better. So we're finished with this front end rebuild.